Hello and welcome back to our third episode of Transrational Perspectives. I'm Noah Taylor.
My name is Shawn Bryant. I'm originally from Canada. I'm joining you from South Korea. I have a PhD in peace, conflict, and development studies, and I'm one of the co-hosts of Transrational Perspectives. Noah?
And in this episode, we're going to be focusing on the origins and the development of the field of peace and conflict studies. In particular, we're going to pay attention to its relationship to the philosophical and cultural movements of postmodernism. And we're going to use that to move into a discussion of what's been called the theory of many pieces, or the transrational shift in peace and conflict studies. So this is where we're going to be going in this episode. So Shawn, can you start us off talking a bit about the origins of the field of peace and conflict studies as you see them?
Well, I see peace itself is a key cultural concept that has been important for humankind since the beginning. But what is different about then peace studies as an academic discipline is that it really emerged as a topic that warranted sort of systematic study because of the aftermath of the Second World War, of the atrocities of the 20th century. So the big events that are going to be kind of pointed to as the motivation to create a systematic way of study about peace were things like the invention of the atomic bomb and the detonation of the atomic bomb over Japan, of the Holocaust, of the Second World War, and the sort of impending doom around these things that say that war no longer had just like local consequences, but had the capacity for complete like global catastrophe. Mm-hmm. So therefore, the war war even amongst people that really glorified war could understand the detrimental effects and the scourge of war. But to see that to expand to the possibility of wiping out human life, or not just human life, all life in large geographical areas, that was the impetus to say, well, look, we as some kind of collective human species need to be thinking about this. So then some of the early academic movements then come out of this. Something you want to add to that about where it started?
Well, I think that when I was thinking about trying to put together my thoughts and my notes on what is peace and conflict studies and where does it come from, it's a bit strange because it's really several things that are kind of woven together. We have, on one hand, peace and conflict studies as a formal academic discipline, which is about 50, 60 years old now. But on the other hand, as you were saying, the human concern for peace and concern with issues of conflict is probably one of our most archaic things that we've had to deal with as a species. And what peace and conflict studies, I think, is the coming together of these things, the archaic human concern for issues of peace and conflict, together with it being defined as a formal field of study. And that point of synergy really then has started to grow in the past few decades and start to develop its own methodological approaches and assumptions and modes of practice. And some of the things that I think really characterize what peace and conflict studies is now, as you were saying, Shawn, is the sense of doubt, or a sense of peace studies as a mode of criticism. In my view, and I think in the view of many, peace studies began, I would say, as quintessentially a postmodern discipline. Mm-hmm. It came out of the disillusion, I'd say a really profound sense of disillusionment if you think about the time leading up to the First and Second World War was really characterized by a type of optimism really founded in modernity, that we were on a path towards growth and development, and if we had either the right beliefs or the right faith in our technology and our governance systems, that we would achieve kind of the peace on earth, whether your peace on earth was a religious one or your peace on earth was one that was founded in the pillars of rationality and modernity. But what we saw with the First World War was just it seemed like the world had gone crazy, and that this was around the time that international relations began as a field, and it really sought to understand what happened. How did the world go to war, and then how can we prevent that from happening again? But shortly after, of course, the First World War led to the Second World War, and that really, I think, instigated a profound sense of doubt in the narratives and the stories that had governed our sense of reality and how we make sense of the world. And peace study starts from this moment of falling apart and not knowing what to trust.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add to that, or point out that those moments are also when you see the beginnings of the institutional structures that we are quite familiar with, of the international system. So the League of Nations was created, the United Nations was created after the Second World War, and the agenda of the United Nations is clear. I think the motto is "Our hope for peace," and the lines in the Constitution of the United Nations and say, like, this is to. I don't have it in front of me, but it is created as a mechanism to safeguarding peace in the world.
And it's really set in a sense of idealism, I think, of the time, that through building bridges rather than arming our defenses, and through diplomacy and through communication and through an emerging sense of international politics, we could create a more peaceful world. And I think that was really at the source of the origination of those kinds of ideas.
And especially we were looking at it as coming off of the intellectual current of the Enlightenment, of saying that like you said, this belief in progress and of the capacity of the human condition to overcome all of the challenges of nature and to be able to extract the secrets of the natural world and to harness them, and that there was this really profound understanding that like human capacity seemed limitless, and then to have that produce such nightmares, to produce such sort of heinous examples of cruelty and injustice in the 20th century, really was created this shift and this soul searching. Well, how can it be that the things that the capacities of our human species that are able to produce such beautiful things and such good things also have this shadow side that can produce such horrible things, such suffering.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think there was both a sense of doubt at the time in the structures that gave us meaning, but also in our own relationship to those structures. And I think that what peace studies really was in the beginning was if international relations was seen as the primary way we avoid world war, and it had obviously failed, we began really an interdisciplinary and then eventually transdisciplinary project of where can we pull in other knowledge from, where can we pull in other understandings from. And it's a bit hard to find the actual origination of peace and conflict studies as an academic discipline, but it's tied into the early development and insights of humanistic psychology and eventually transpersonal psychology. And in the very beginning too, it was also tied into the peace movements of a lot of different what we call the peace churches of the Mennonites and the Quakers, which shaped a lot of the very early peace and conflict thinking, also combined with a lot of influence by the story of Gandhi and also the writings of his ideas of nonviolence, which were emerging at the same time as Dr. Martin Luther King, and had constructed a distinctly modern, moving towards postmodern way of viewing nonviolent resistance to really kind of overt physical violence.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to just differentiate a little bit between what are some of the origin parts of, let's say, the Innsbruck School of Peace Studies or a transrational or transrational approaches to peace, which are rooted in, say, humanistic psychology, and the other schools of peace and conflict studies that don't necessarily draw the same inspiration from humanistic psychology, such as like the idealistic currents of international relations. That's far more of a rational framework of understanding peace and conflict studies, or as you mentioned, some of the peace movements that have come from their source their inspiration in like religious doctrines. I wanted to come back to the idea though of peace studies as being in essence a postmodern endeavor, because it is facing the narratives of modernity, that is the narratives of progress and of truth and questioning that. I think one of the major moments of kind of a coalescing of this kind of modern peace understanding is the nuclear disarmament movement, which is saying like, no thanks. This kind of progress, this kind of technology, this kind of is the wrong direction for me. And for this group of people who are protesting it. So no, we don't want any more of that. And so one of the things then that this idea of this embracing this postmodern condition, that is, we're in a time in which we're starting to doubt all of the truths that we've held so dear for so long and have guided the course of the human history of the previous century or so, to say, well, then if these truths that I held so dear are I have holes in them, well then, like, what are the consequences of that? What does that mean for me? And then to start seeing, well, that opens this door for a relativistic perspective, saying, well, then if these truths aren't necessarily like a capital T truth, but maybe like I see a small truth here, a truth that is temporally bound, or only exists in my concrete relationships. Well, what else does that mean for me? So then embracing this idea of relativism and also of radical plurality, then the idea of peace is that, well, then peace is not just one universal monolithic peace, not just like God's peace that will come down to earth for everyone, but the idea that the pieces are many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this picking up on the same idea as the disillusionment and distrust of the narratives and the perspective which previously had oriented society. I think this same kind of critical perspective got turned on the notion of peace itself. I think that in the realm of religious thinking, especially in terms of the Abrahamic faiths, and also in terms of modernity, it's very easy to conceptualize peace with a capital P, if we want to call it that. A monolithic or monological understanding of peace, where peace is defined as one kind of thing. Peace is the absence of violence, or peace is heaven, or peace is the socialist utopia, and it's not anything that is not that. And I think that what peace studies has been moving into has really been birthed through the deconstruction of the notion of this one monological peace. And that opening, like questioning really what peace is. And it's quite a simple process, actually. If you were to just go out amongst your friends and colleagues and ask them all what is peace, you're probably not going to get a singular answer. And I think even as a thought experiment, it's quite easy to get a feeling of the difference. Like if I think about how I experience peace in my daily life, is that really the same definition as when I think about peace in the Middle East, or if I think about peace at an international level? This is the same word in English, but these are two very different felt concepts for me. And that this insight, I think, is really what has resulted in the transrational shift in peace and conflict studies, or the call for many pieces.
And following on that, I think that it's not a really radical concept or difficult for people to understand the idea of peace being a uniquely subjective experience.
Yeah.
And so therefore there are as many definitions of peace as there are
people,
human beings, as there are perceiving subjects in the world.
Right.
I think that in general people are going to get that, but it always then comes up against some kind of like rational limit. It's like, well, that's fine for your internal world, but but how do we stop the bombs falling on Syria, or something like this? So there's also then, I think, some inherent understanding of the difference and limits to internal and external understandings of peace. So the external being then the realm of justice and security in our collective space, so outside of my internal experience, and then my subjective and internal experience of peace as being out of my feeling of tranquility or harmony. And add to that.
Yeah, and I think that there's also an element of, yes, we can say there is an infinite number of understandings of peace, as many as there are perceiving subjects, but there also needs to be some coherence in the way that we talk about it in order to have a conversation about peace. Because if we really want to stop the bombs from falling and we want to build peace, we need to have a way of thinking about what we are talking about. And one of the things that is proposed in this many pieces framework, which originally comes from the UNESCO chair for peace and conflict studies at the University of Innsbruck, is talking about peace in terms of families of peace. And it might seem like a bit of a strange word rather than category or typology of peace, but family is chosen as a specific way of indicating a category of peace, because just like families are, the lines at the edges get a little bit fuzzy. Like eventually, at some level, we're all related to each other. So where so where we draw the lines between different understandings of pieces will be, of course, blurry. And the way that this is talked about now is looking at the energetic family of peace, the moral understanding of peace, the modern understanding of peace, the postmodern understanding of peace, and finally the transrational understanding of peace. I don't know if you want to mention a little bit more about those.
Well, I would just say or add to that to that. In addition to those families, it can also be labeled as just as I alluded to before with the justice and security, is that peace can be understood as emerging from security. So that's the peace is the lack of war understanding. That peace can be understood as justice, and that can be understood as, say, a secular justice in the court system as well as a divine justice in heaven. Peace can be understood as truth, so as a cultural truth or a normative truth, and peace can be understood as harmony, and that can be an internal harmony, or it can also be understood as the harmony of the human being between the heaven and earth, being in harmony with all of the sort of forces of nature.
And so we have this energetic, moral, modern, and postmodern understanding, which we could also call peace out of harmony, security, justice, or truth, which leads us, I think, to the transrational perspective. And a transrational perspective, in my view, I think of it as a balanced embrace. It is looking at in any given situation of conflict, any episode of conflict, and seeing where are the needs for harmony, security, justice, or truth being addressed or not, and where is it out of balance. And to me, this really makes up the essence of what a transrational approach is. It means, I think it's also important to point out, if we back up a few steps here, that these four families of peace are by no means definitive, nor do they measure all experiences of peace. I like to think of them as maybe the difference between Celsius and Fahrenheit in measuring temperature. They're representing the same phenomena, but they are different ways of chopping it up.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in there too. Like, it was one of the things I found fascinating about understanding this sort of postmodern approach to pieces, is that, like you mentioned, that peace can mean, in the English word peace would cover like a few different understandings of peace, from this global security to internal experience of harmony and tranquility, and this really shows up when you start to translate peace into other languages. So if you start with like related Indo-European languages that have kind of similar history and similar kind of cultural touchstones, translated into Spanish "paz" or French "paix" or German "Frieden," you find like very similar understandings of what peace is. But then if you start going further afield and translating into other languages from very different cultural backgrounds, and then, well, how do you say peace in your language? And like, well, you mean like no war? Is that peace? Because then you get into some like an important like ontological question then of like, what is the concept you're trying to translate? Because often you'll get ideas that are like, oh yeah, well, peace is everybody working together, or one that Wolfgang Dietrich cites in one of the books. I actually forget which book it is, but it said that there was a student from Burkina Faso who said, the word for peace is fresh air. And because then it comes, you really see the sort of ontological dilemma that's at the core here, because you get into questions. Well, it's no longer just defined as no war, but some kind of understanding of a positive peace, using Johann Galtung's term. Like, well, some quality of harmony with the fresh air, or people working together, or the harmony of the communal spirit, or something like this.
Yeah, and I think that it's one of the things that we'll discuss in upcoming episodes is how different words for peace in different languages reflect these different peace families, and that how these different peace families also reflect an understanding of how conflicts work, and also what kind of approaches one would use to intervene within those conflicts. If you understand peace as being related to harmony, you're going to engage with the conflict in a very different way than if you understand peace as being based primarily in physical security.
Mm-hmm.
And
exactly.
So this will be a topic that we'll pick up in the next episode, where we go in more depth into each of these 5 peace families.
Great. Well, look forward to the next conversation.
All right. And so thank you for joining us today on Transrational Perspectives, episode 3, and tune in next time.